Okay, hi guys. How you doing? How you doing? Good, I'm good. Okay, so I have to be here because I'm videotaping this lecture for the other class. Okay, so I'm on this side. Sorry guys over there. Next week I'll teach all over on that side. All right. Yeah, I put brown back in it.
Yeah, that's not my blue.
That's nice.
Thank you. All right. So today we're talking about attention. And I'm hoping that we can just power through the whole lecture and then get out early. That's what I'm hoping for. So let's see how it goes. I'm not going to go past an hour and a half without taking a break, though. That's not going to happen. Because we'll just die. All right. We're going to do the best we can today. Talk about attention. And then these guys who are hearing me on video, they missed me while I go over here to change the slides. Okay. So I'll just...
Wait, is this live?
Okay. So I like the topic of attention because knowing this information about attention and how it works and how our attentional systems are constructed, what they can do, what they can't do, allows me to make better choices in how I deploy those abilities. And when I can maximize my ability to pay attention in the best ways, it also allows me to reduce my own errors, which is really good for lots of different situations, from taking a test to driving a car. And then finally, I think that people worry about their attentional abilities. Is there something wrong with my ability to pay attention? And hopefully when we talk through a few of these things, you'll see that there are very common issues with attention that we all experience. So this is kind of just a broad definition of attention. What is attention? Well, everyone knows what attention is. Everyone knows, right, what attention is. It's taking possession by the mind in clear and vivid form of one out of what seems several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thought. It's focalization, concentration of our consciousness. Those are of its essence, It implies that we're withdrawing from some things in order to deal effectively with others. It's a condition which has an opposite, which is being confused or dazed or scatterbrained. It's all clear now, right? You get it, okay? So everything that has been referred to in this wonderful description by William James, who's a great psychologist, and no offense to James, everything in this is kind of referring to another thing that's difficult to define. Taking possession by the mind. Well, what's the mind? Okay, we have simultaneous possible objects or trains of thought. Okay, that's pretty understandable, but what's focalization? What's concentration? It's just another word for attention, Okay, so I like this. We're not looking at this, but we are looking at this. But it doesn't even say looking, right? Because attention might not always be about looking, right? So we have this, and everybody knows what it means. You all know what it means when I say attention. But how would we, if we were being scientists, how would we operationally define attention? Okay, if you were a scientist and you were studying attention, what would you actually do? What would you actually measure? What would you actually ask? How would you see if someone was paying attention? Yes, Sushi.
A span test?
A span test? Like what's that?
Sorry, isn't that, and maybe that's for working memory, but it's where you try to see how much information you can hold.
You can recall like a digit span task? Okay, so in digit span task, I do something like I say to you, remember these numbers, 5, 9, 7, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Okay, now say them back to me.
5, 7, 9, 1.
Great job, you guys. So yeah, as Sushi mentioned, that's typically seen as a working memory task. How many things can you keep present in your active brain, your working memory, in order to use them? And I guess you could say, you know, that might be a measure of attention. Was the person paying attention to you or not? Right, to get the numbers, to repeat them back to you. But how do you know whether a person who has poor performance has poor attention or poor memory? Yeah. No, you can answer the other question, which was how do you define it if you want?
Also, you could give them instructions on how to complete a task, and verbal instructions, and then see how they complete the task.
Okay.
How you measure attention.
Okay, so you could give them verbal instructions, and then you can see that has a number of different parts, and then you can see how many of those parts were they capable of actually doing. Okay, but that kind of has the same problem as the other one. How do you distinguish that from memory? It's kind of hard, right? Yeah.
You could do something simple like staying on task, like following a dot, and you know that's boring, but you know you have to pay attention to it. They stop.
What do you mean following a dot?
You could put a screen, like a follow dot, maybe click.
Oh, so you mean with your eyes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or like tracing it with the mouse?
Yeah,
okay.
some
All
tasks
right.
like that.
That's great, and that has been used as a measure of attention many times. Where's the person's eyes going? Okay, and if their eyes are following the thing, that tells me that they're paying attention to it, right? And that could be something that we could use. You know, where are the people looking is a measure of where they're attending, and that's a very common measure of attention. But are you always looking at something that you're paying attention to? No, okay, but it is one way of measuring it, and asking, you know, how many things did you remember that I just said, that's one way. What's another way we might measure attention? Yeah.
Well, depending on what's going on, you can tell by, say you're giving a lecture, and they may not be looking at you, but they're writing. So you can acknowledge, okay, maybe they're just writing something I'm speaking about.
So maybe you could look at the thoroughness of somebody's notes and see if that, you know, at that as a measure of attention. How thorough are your notes? But again, you know, that is a great measure. I love it. You could say, you know, how much notes a person takes tells you about, and how accurate they are, tells you about how much they were paying attention. But is that, you know, could I have somebody who's listening with perfect attention and doesn't take any notes? That's possible, okay? But it is a perfectly good measure of attention. My point is, when you're doing some kind of study and saying you're measuring attention, you have to explain what specifically you're measuring. It's not just good enough to say, well, we measured attention. Well, what does that mean? Okay, did we ask the people, are you paying attention now? Are you paying attention now? Are you paying attention now? You know, did they have a little button that they could turn up and down for a dial of how much they're paying attention at a given time? Yeah.
I was gonna say, kind of like the guy that has this separated focus.
Uh-huh.
He had like the two different images that would pop up, and he would have to point out the ones that they were talking about, but
Right.
it was separate. So that could be kind of like attention too.
Right.
Pointing out stuff like that.
Oh, I love it. So like what you're consciously aware of
Yeah.
is kind of like what you're attending to. So what's in your consciousness right now? And you could ask that guy, which thing did he see?
Mm-hmm.
And he was, you know, he had conscious awareness of only what he was seeing with his right eye, left brain, right? Okay. Great. That's a great point. I love it. Okay. So, let me tell you about one kind of study that we did early on and we continue to use to this day as a measure of attention. It's called a dichotic listening task. And here's what happens in a dichotic listening task. They put headphones on your ears and they play different things to the two ears. Okay, so to your left ear, they might play a man's voice telling you a story about, you know, living in the country. And in your right ear, you might have a woman's voice telling you a story about the time that she went on a hot air balloon ride, okay? And I say to you, all right, I want you to listen to the man's voice, right, in your left ear. I want you to pay attention to him, all right? So the information is going in through both ears, and if I told you to do the opposite, you could do that just as well. I told you listen to the woman talking about the hot air balloon and not the man about living in the country. You could pay attention to whichever side I tell you, the left or the right, the guy's voice or the gal's voice, right? So that's the attended channel versus the unattended channel. The one I tell you pay attention to this and don't pay attention to this. And the way that they measure how well you're paying attention, right, and therefore how much you're not being distracted by the other story, is about being able to repeat the story. So if you're listening to the story, you're asked to just repeat what you just heard. Okay? And so you listen to two things at the same time. They have it coming one into one ear and one into the other ear, but they say pay attention to this one in the left ear. And if you're paying good attention, you should have no trouble repeating what he's saying in your left ear. Right? Okay, so the amount of words that they repeated correctly was a measure of attention. That's pretty good, right? You don't need to have any memory past, being able to repeat back a simple sentence. Or sometimes they do it with just one word. So you don't even have to have a good memory. They'll just say one word. And so you repeat the words in your left ear or you repeat the words in your right ear, depending on which one you're attending to. Okay? And what participants would say is, when you ask them at the end, the people who had, good scores that showed they were paying attention, they repeated all the words that they were supposed to repeat, which we call shadowing. The people who did that well would tell you, well, if you ask them what was going on in your right ear, what was that story about, they'll say, I didn't know. I don't know. I wasn't listening to that one. I wasn't paying attention to that one. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. I've used this in some of my research, this test. Okay. So we have kind of a visual version of a dichotic listing task, okay? And let me play the video. Okay, so here's the deal here. This is a attention task, just like the dichotic listing task was an attention task, okay? So the measure is how many of the words can you repeat, okay? So in this, it's not about being able to repeat a number of words. It's also not about memory. You don't have to remember anything. All you have to do is count. Okay, so they're gonna have some people who are playing around with a basketball, and they're gonna ask you to count the number of times that you see the basketball being passed back and forth. Okay. Just the players wearing white. You're supposed to count the number of times just the players wearing white are passing the basketball. And the number of times that you can count that they pass the basketball back and forth is your measure of how well you're paying attention, right?
Oh.
How many passes did you count?
Who got it?
13.
13? How many people said 13? Raise your hand if you said 13. How many people said 13? How many people had a different number? Somebody else have a different, what did you guys get?
15.
15, okay. And of you people who just answered that question, how many people saw the gorilla? You didn't. You didn't see it, did you? You were paying good attention. The rest of them weren't. Right? Okay. So for those of you who are doing the right thing, the gorilla was in an unattended channel. But some of you have seen this before, so be distracted. Okay. Okay, so even though a lot of stimuli can be ignored, okay, like a gorilla even, when attention is focused, there are some things that tend to draw our attention away. Okay, so for people, for example, who had prior knowledge of this video, that top-down information told you that there was going to be something else interesting that you should probably keep an eye out for, okay? And that's true of things that you have previous knowledge of. So for example, if you're in a room where there's a ton of background noise, it is hard to pick out any given noise out of that background noise. You know, it just sounds like, have you ever been at a restaurant and you just kind of hear everybody in the background, it just sounds like babble, in the background at a restaurant, okay? But if you hear somebody say your name, right, or something that sounds like your name, it will draw your attention. And depending on how close the people are to you, you can even direct your attention. Sometimes I try to do this at restaurants just for fun. You can try to listen to the people at the table in front of you, the table to your right, the table to your left, and switch who you're paying attention to. Now, you're not changing the auditory information at all. It's still the same conversations going on at the same volume, generally speaking, but what you're doing is you're changing which one you pay attention to, okay? So that kind of background noise, where there's no certain thing that you're hearing, we call that the cocktail party effect, because, you know, like people talking at a cocktail party. Yeah.
Would that be the same as like if you're listening to music, like picking out the bass guitar and then kind of picking out the guitar, picking out the drums, but just trying to listen to that one instrument?
Absolutely, absolutely. You can. That's another great example of that, where there's all kinds of auditory information, and you can choose which piece you're paying attention to. I'm going to listen to just the guitar because I'm really into the guitar this time. This time I'm going to listen to just the drums. Absolutely, but it's all there all the time, right? You're just changing what you're paying attention to. Okay, so of course, being scientists, being cognitive scientists, we're going to try to explain these phenomena, what's going on. And so, you know, how is it that we can do this? And so one of the earliest propositions that they made was this idea of an attentional bottleneck, okay? So it's kind of like there's all of this information, a tremendous amount of information in the world, and if we tried to take everything in all at once, it would just all get stuck, like when traffic has to bottleneck. Okay, but if what we do instead is put a filter on that information, we can direct just the information we want to flow through the bottleneck. Okay, if we know that all of that other stuff that's coming down the freeway we don't want to get to our city, we want to route that away and we want to just direct the traffic that we want towards our city. And the way that we filter things changes through experience. Okay, learning tells us the kinds of things that we're supposed to ignore. So for example, when you're walking down the campus outside, if everything you saw amazed you every time you saw it, you would never get anywhere. You know, you're walking, oh my God, a water bottle. Oh my God, look at this. Oh my, this tent. Oh, what is this, right? Okay. So we have to learn to filter out stimuli that aren't important. Okay, we have to learn to say, I'm not going to have to remember what color t-shirt everybody was wearing in this class today. And so my brain doesn't attend to it. If you haven't had experience with a certain stimulus, if something is new, it's going to capture your attention. You haven't learned to deal with that thing yet. That's why when you see like a new animal that you've never seen before, you're like, whoa, what is this weird thing? I've never seen anything like this before. And it captures your attention. Or, you know, let's say that you're driving and all of a sudden there's some weird car that totally doesn't look like any other car you've seen before. You're going to look at it and go, whoa, what's that weird car? It has 8 wheels and 2 of them are on the top. I've never seen anything like that before. It will draw your attention. And then you have to develop new filters all the time. If that becomes the next thing that's on the road all the time, well then you're going to start to, you know, learn to not pay attention to them too. Okay? So our attentional system does filter out unwanted information. It does say, you know, don't attend to these things that are not important. But in doing that, okay, it's going to allow us to have better perception of the thing that we want to attend to. Okay, so attention is not just about not bringing into the system the things you don't want. It's also about heightening the things that you do want. Heightening your ability to perceive the thing that you want to perceive. Okay, so there is a phenomenon called inattentional blindness. And in the experiment that originally McEnroe did in 1998, what they did was they had people look at a fixation point. Okay, so the fixation point is usually at the center of the screen, and this is a very common thing in cognitive tests. You saw it when we were looking at the guy with the severed corpus callosum. They said, look at the fixation point. Okay, so in this they said, we want you to look at the fixation point, but what we want you to do is not pay attention to the thing you're looking at. What we want you to do is ignore the thing you're looking at and pay attention to this other object over here, okay? And people can do that. People are actually really good at doing that. People would, you know, they say, okay, did the vertical part of the cross get bigger or smaller? Bigger, you know? Okay, and now how about the horizontal part of the cross? Did it get bigger or smaller? Smaller. And people have no trouble doing this, even though they're looking at the fixation point. But here's what's weird. Afterwards, when they said to the participant, hey, did you notice that the fixation point changed? And maybe it changed to the letter L or a dot or something like that. They would say, no, I didn't notice that. They didn't notice the thing that they were looking directly at. And my husband and my children do this every time they open the refrigerator. I do not know how this is, but it's like, Mom, where's the yogurt? You said there was a yogurt. I come over, oh my God, it's right there in the middle shelf. It's there, the yogurt. Okay. You know the people I'm talking about. No, but this is me too. This is everybody. This is a really normal part of our attentional processes, and it's because our attention is somewhere else. We're thinking about something else. We're attending to some other kind of information, and so what's in front of our eyes is being filtered out. Okay? So, you know, attention isn't as simple as what's in front of your eyes. Your conscious awareness, your conscious perception of even what's directly in front of your eyes is not the same thing as attention. All right. Okay, and there's another thing called change blindness, okay, and it's a little bit different. In inattentional blindness, you're looking at the thing, but you don't notice what's happening, you don't notice the changes, even though you're looking directly at it. In change blindness, you might be looking at the thing, but you might be looking elsewhere, and it takes you some time, and maybe you don't even notice it at all, when something changes and you don't notice that it changes. Okay, so in change blindness, you may or may not be looking directly at the thing. Okay, and it's hard to notice the change. So I'm going to show you 3 examples right now, 3 short videos that are examples of kind of like the simplest to the most complicated example of change blindness. So here's the first one, and in this, all that's going to happen is that an image is going to blink back and forth, okay? And the image is going to blink back and forth from the one that, from being one way to another way, and only one thing in the scene is going to change, okay? And you just see how many seconds it takes you to figure out what is the thing that's changing as it blinks back and forth. Oh, don't look at this if you have epilepsy. Okay, it's like a stroke. Raise your hand when you see the change. Okay, it's the pathway.
Yeah.
on the upper right. And of course, as soon as you point it out, you're like, how did I not see that? All right. And this is, of course, a more complicated scene.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Oh my God.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe. Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away. It's just a matter of...
Maybe also like the angle on which like the video is. Like, you know how they zoom in at certain areas where you can't really see it?
Well, they were doing that so that they could change it. How else would they change it without you would notice that they didn't
I
do
thought it was
that?
like the first effect where, like, you know how the gorilla passes by?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's kind of similar. Okay. And then, you know, of course, you can have this in the world, right? In the real world.
Quick experiment. Take a look at this. Okay. Now, did you happen to notice anything odd? Watch it end. Seeing changes? Don't worry if you didn't see that it's two different men. It means your brain is doing exactly Imagine how much energy and brain mass it would take for us to remember every single person, place, or thing we encountered. The things that matter, a conversation with a coworker, your child's first step, would be drowned by a deluge of information. So when there are minor changes to the world around us, we often don't pick up on them. There are two similar phenomena at work.
Inattentional blindness is the failure to notice something that's fully obvious right there in front of you when your attention is engaged on something or someone else. Page blindness is a failure to notice the difference between what's there right now and what was there a moment ago.
Scientists such as Daniel Simons from the University of Illinois have spent years devising experiments testing just how perceptive and unperceptive humans actually are.
So we feel like we're aware of everything, that we're taking in all of the details, and that if something unimportant happens, we'll automatically notice it. It'll capture our attention. The reality is that we often don't notice unexpected things because we're aware of far less of our world than we think we are.
So how much or how little are we actually aware of? We decided to recreate one of Simon's most famous experiments to see for ourselves. Here's the setup. Our senior series producer, Vin, poses as a lost pedestrian and asks a passerby for directions.
Excuse me? I'm looking for the skyline.
Then, we break the two up, walking through them holding a large sheet of wood. Now watch as I replace Vin. You might think people would notice the switch, but almost half the time, they do. Of course, that means more than half the time they did. I tried the experiment 9 times, and by no means was it good science. But we were surprised 4 people didn't notice the switch. In Simon's original experiment, 7 out of 15 people didn't either. So what determines whether or not you can figure out the switch?
When you look at another person, you encode what's relevant for what you're doing right then, in that case, giving directions. And you don't pay attention to the details that are irrelevant, say what color their shirt is or exactly how tall they are. As long as you are able to make sense of the meaning of the scene and roughly the main categories of that person, say their height, their age, what race they are, what sex they are, as long as those important things don't change, the meaning of the scene really hasn't changed and you're not going to notice that anything's different.
Scientists have documented inattentional and change blindness since the 1970s, and while they allow you to focus your attention, this failure to see every detail can prove costly. Drivers often cause accidents because they overlook quick changes to the environments, such as pedestrians or cyclists. Faulty memories can wreak havoc during eyewitness testimony.
The goal of vision isn't to build a photograph or a complete model of the world in your mind. The goal of vision is to make sense of the meaning of the world around you. Being aware of our limitations can help us adapt and compensate for them, allowing us to do things that prevent the really negative consequences that can happen due to failures of awareness.
For example, Simons thinks that people might be willing to put away their cell phone when driving if they just understood the limits to their attention. Juries might realize that eyewitness testimony is far from ideal. And the next time you and a friend are fighting about the details of a past event, it's likely you're both wrong. That's something to remember.
Yeah.
I have an example of change blindness. I used to work at a winery, and there used to be in this one big courtyard a giant oak tree. And one day they removed it, and so the tree was gone, and nobody noticed for a couple of days that the tree was gone.
Wow.
Employees.
A whole tree.
Period. A whole oak tree. And then when they replaced the tree and put a new tree there, a couple of days went by, and everyone's like, I was like, "Do you guys see the tree?" They're like, "What tree?" I'm like, when did that get there 2 days ago?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and they also say, you're most likely to have accidents within a mile of your home. And there's 2 reasons for that. Number 1, that's where you mostly are. You have to be within that mile of your home to get anywhere else, right? But also, because that's where you're paying the least attention. You're used to the way things are, and you're kind of just going on automatic. So, you might say, well, why is it that we have a perceptual system that's designed to miss things? And the reason is because it's limited capacity. We have a limited capacity system. Our attentional resources, if we were applying our attention to everything equally, we would be taking in a tremendous amount of information that was completely unnecessary. And so what you want to have instead is a perceptual system that's primed. A perceptual system that is able to expect what's going to happen based on previous experience. And our perceptual systems are designed to just be able to pick out anything that's kind of new, because there's no way you could anticipate every possible new thing that might ever happen. So it's good to have a system that just says, hey, if this is novel, it's going to draw our attention. Otherwise, what we are going to do is all of these things that we've just come to expect, we're going to kind of filter out. one of the first things that we looked at when it comes to attention, of course, was visual attention. In other words, can we manipulate where you're going to look versus where you're going to attend? And our ability to focus on a certain position in space, we call our spatial attention. And there was a scientist by the name of Posner who wanted to see if he could change, okay, our ability to immediately attend to a stimulus, okay? He kind of wanted to mess with our attentional abilities. And so he came up with this task that he called Posner Spatial Cueing Task. And essentially what he was trying to look at was, can I make you slower to pick up something that you should pick up to get an answer, to respond to something? Can I decrease your response time by manipulating your attention? And so what he would do was he would, okay, so there's two boxes, and you're supposed to look at the fixation point in between the two boxes, and then you're supposed to either, one is going to light up with the color yellow, let's say, and then immediately after the color yellow, you're going to see a star inside that box, okay? And your job is to look at the fixation point and click to the left when the star appears on the left, and click on the right when the star appears on the right. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay? And so what he would do was, he would give you a cue, right? The cue was the yellow light, and then the thing that you were actually supposed to respond to is the star. And so what he would do is he would have the yellow light and then the star, the yellow light and then the star, the yellow light and then the star. And people got really fast at clicking on the star, right? Because if I say yellow light and then star, you know as soon as the yellow light comes on, next there's going to be a star. So you get ready to click on it, right? But what he would do instead was, some of the time it would be a false cue. Some of the time it would glow yellow, but then the star wouldn't appear. And when that happened, people were really slow to respond to the star because they were expecting it to follow the yellow light, right? And then it doesn't, right? And so what he found was that it wasn't necessarily, it didn't have anything to do with eye gaze, because the whole time they were just fixated on the center. And that if he used this thing to manipulate where your attention went, the cue, he could manipulate how fast you were able to respond to the real stimulus, which was the star. Yeah.
How is it different than priming with the yellow?
Oh, it is priming. It's a form of priming.
Okay.
Yes, that's exactly right. But imagine that some of the time the thing didn't happen that you were expecting to happen. It went yellow, but then the star didn't appear. You were a lot slower on those. The yellow appeared in the wrong box. So you had to go all the way back to shifting your attention over to the side that you weren't expecting it to be at. Does this make sense? Okay? It's about the probability. Your brain can detect the probability that yellow is immediately followed by star. Our brain is really good at picking up these patterns. Okay. So what are the brain processes that underlie these behaviors? Okay, it's really complicated to study what's going on in the brain because there's so many pieces to the attention puzzle. There's the visual pieces, there's further processing of the spatial information, all of these different things. So it's hard to tease out which areas of the brain are particularly active when you're doing a task if there are a lot of areas of the brain that are active. But we figured out, well, unsurprisingly, visual cortex. Okay, unsurprisingly, when you're talking about visual attention, the visual cortex in your occipital lobe is involved, right? And your midbrain, okay? So your thalamus needs to route visual information where it needs to go. So your midbrain is very active. But your frontal lobes are really important in controlling that whole process. Your frontal lobes, depending on where you use them to control where the visual attention is going. Okay? And then your parietal lobes are also involved for a couple of reasons. Number one, because our parietal lobes are very involved in processing spatial information. Okay, spatial information is heavily processed by the parietal lobe. But also because memories that are stored in neurons in your parietal lobe are linked to certain things that you might see, right? Okay, so you have memories of previous instances of seeing those things. Okay, so those 4 areas of the brain seem to be really important in where we direct our visual attention. And the parietal lobe especially allows us to bring memory instead of just what's directly in front of your eyes. So for example, if you come home and you know, every night when you come home you want to have a cup of coffee, or in the morning you want to have a cup of coffee, okay? And you go out to your cabinet and you know the coffee is always up there in the left hand side of the cabinet. You can go in and you can just automatically open the door and take the things out. All of that kind of memory is parietal lobe stuff, okay? It's spatial memory. And so, you know, you can imagine how surprised your brain would be if the parietal lobe's doing this and interacting and saying coffee should be up there, and you went to reach up and, you know, the cat was up in the cabinet instead. Ah! You know, okay, so those 4 areas of the brain. So here's your quiz. What were 3 of the 4 areas of the brain that I just mentioned as involved in visual attention? Number 2, if you were a researcher, how would you operationally define attention? What would you measure if you were doing a study measuring attention? What is it specifically? An operational definition. I don't want, you know, just words definition. I want like what you would actually do to measure it. The actual thing you're measuring. Okay, we can come back to this if we need to at the end. Okay. We are doing very well with getting out of here early. Okay, let's keep going. So, one of the questions that people who study attention asked after they looked at these kinds of results, okay? So there's Posner's spatial cueing task, and it seems that, you look at the question, okay, well, is it about where we're attending in space, the spatial location, or is it the object itself that's drawing our attention, So is the cue telling us look over to this place in space, or pay attention to this place in space, or is it saying, hey, the object is about to show up? What is going on with our attention systems? And of course, the answer is we can have both. The answer is going to be that we can have both. Remember the lady who when she was drawing the flowers, did I show you the lady who was drawing the, okay, good. The lady who was drawing the flowers, and she would draw all of the one side, and then she would just leave off everything over in the left-hand corner. She had something called hemi-neglect, or unilateral neglect. And so here's a place where we can look at neuroscience, and we can look at people like her, where we're aware that she has this damage to her parietal lobe. We know what's going on, and this damage to her parietal lobe, to her right parietal lobe, made it so that she had difficulty attending to the left side of her visual field. But they took a bunch of hemi-neglect patients and they gave them this task, okay? So check this out. So at first, they give them this object right here, okay? And a hemi-neglect patient who's neglecting the left-hand side, but paying attention to the right-hand side, is going to attend to the right circle. They're going to attend to the red circle, and they're going to miss the purple one, right? So if you just have them, you're showing them pictures, and you say, what color is the circle right here? They're going to say red, okay? Do you get this? But now, if you take that picture and you manipulate it so that what was on the right-hand side, where the red circle was, you flip it, and they watch you doing it, okay? They're watching it rotate on the screen, and then the red ball, the red circle, goes over to the left-hand side. They still attend to it. Okay, you took the thing from the right-hand side, you put it into the left-hand field, but because it was originally in the right-hand side, they don't have any trouble tracking it going over to the left-hand side. And so now you say to them, okay, now what color do you see? Okay, they'll say the right one, but now they also attend over here, and they'll say, oh, there's a purple one too. Okay. So our brains do a thing called feature binding, all right? And yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's
in
cool.
the picture they had, when they're copying the clock, they're still able to draw the whole circle. Why are they, if they can't see the left, so how?
Probably because we're just used to finishing it up. Just when we write a circle, we're just used to making the motion.
Okay.
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just because I figured with a flower. And
But if you do look at them, sometimes they will just draw that. Sometimes, yeah.
Okay.
Or sometimes this gets just blobbed off, and they'll do stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. We've talked about how your brain has feature detectors, right? Okay? How you have areas in your brain that respond to certain things. One that responds to a U shape, and that we put all the features together in order to know what a word is, okay? We do this with all objects. So if you look at this thing right here, you can either report to me that it's blue, or you can report to me that it's a square. In this one, you can report to me that it's yellow or a triangle, and red or a circle, right? When you look at an object, even though each aspect of that thing is processed independently by your brain, you don't know that. Okay, you don't know that your brain is automatically binding those separate pieces of information together. You just see a blue square or a yellow triangle or a red circle. You just see whatever it is that you're looking at. And you might say then, okay, well then how do we know that there are separate feature detectors? And the reason is because we can overload your attention and totally mess up your ability to do this. Okay, so if we overload your attention, it becomes very difficult for you to report both aspects of the feature, both aspects of the thing you're looking at. Yeah.
Sorry, is
That's
it
okay.
like the one where it says like red, but the actual color of the word is like?
We're gonna get to the strip effect in just a second. Okay. So if we make it so that you're having to attend to certain other things we say, you know, attend to this, you might be able to report the color or the shape, but it's very difficult to report both if we're distracting you with other things. Okay. So our attentional system has kind of a trade-off. We can either focus our attention broadly and take in a lot of information, but maybe make mistakes, or we can narrow our attention so that we're only paying attention to a certain thing, but then that's going to be really slow. Okay, so for example, if I say to you, you know, what do you see right here? What do you see in this picture? A bunch of O's and N's and they're red and green, right? Okay, so if I tell you to take in just generally what you're seeing, you have no trouble doing that. It's a bunch of O's and N's and they're red and green. But if I say to you, okay, great, you did great on getting the big picture, but now I want you to find only the red O. All right, only the red O. You have to go through the things one by one, more or less, or area by area, until you say, oh, there it is. All right, so we can overload your attention and you might not notice the one red O, or we can say just take your attention one by one, very narrow focus, and you'll be able to find a specific instance that deviates from the rest. Okay. What we call nowadays multitasking has been called divided attention by cognitive scientists for many, many years. So divided attention is the same thing as multitasking. It's where you want to do more than one thing at the same time, okay? And there are some things that are really easy, and there are other things that are really hard. So for example, walking and talking at the same time is generally pretty easy. I'm doing it right now. You know, I pace back and forth and I talk to you guys at the same time. I move my hands and I talk to you guys at the same time. But there are other things that seem to not go very well together, where your attention to one thing really strongly draws you away from your ability to pay attention to another thing, like when you're texting and driving. And the reason is because for whatever you're trying to attend to, you must have the attentional resources for it. And so clearly, when I'm walking and moving my hands and talking at the same time, I have enough attentional resources for all of those things. But what I can't do at the same time is read a book. I could not read a book and give this lecture at the same time. I don't have enough resources in order to do that. So what's going on? What's the difference there? And the answer is, you have general attention, but then you also have specific kinds of attention. And the more alike two tasks are, the harder it's going to be for you to do the two things at the same time. So the reason I can't give you a lecture and read at the same time is because those are both language-based activities. And your language attention is its own little bucket of information. It's its own little bucket of attention. But the hand waving ability, my ability to wave my hand at the same time, doesn't draw from that same specific pool. It comes from another pool, which is about being able to move your hands. All right? So we know that this is true because we've done experiments where we make the distractor more and more related to the task. And the more and more the distractor is related to the task, the more and more it's going to distract you. So for example, talking to a person on the phone takes more of your attention and makes you more likely to make errors when you're driving than talking to a passenger. And the reason is because your passenger is in the car with you and they're attending to the same things you're attending to. If all of a sudden somebody darts in front of the car, your passenger is going to stop at the same time you stop, and that's going to allow you to shift your attentional resources to the person who darted in front of you. But the person on the phone doesn't know that. So this task going on over here is less related to the driving than the person who's actually sitting with you. All right? The person who's sitting on the other end of the phone doesn't know what's going on with that. But it does seem that no matter how different tasks are, even if they're extremely different, there is a little bit of interference still. So your general attentional pool still does matter. So for example, I might be waving my hands while I'm talking, and if something unexpected happened, like a person came in when I was over here like this, I might hit them in the face. Okay? So even if the tasks are very dissimilar, there is still some general attention ability that all tasks share. So it's like we have a big resource of attention, and then there's some little buckets in there, but there is overall attention too, okay? And so sometimes they call this general attention ability, they call it like our gas tank, our energy supply for attention, our mental tools for attention. And so, you know, okay, you could have this general supply that's like a gas tank, and that's important, but you can also think that you have these different mental tools. One that's for language-based stuff, one that's for, you know, being able to move, one that's for, you know, being able to do something else, walk and chew gum and all the different stuff you want to do. And the idea is that we have a mental tool called a response selector. And that response selector says, oh, okay, well, which thing do I want to pay attention to right now so I can go forward with? Okay, so the response selector has a very easy time when the person in the car with you is attending to the same thing you are. And the response selector has a harder time choosing a response when what's going on in the car is totally different from the conversation you're having on the phone. Does that make sense? Okay, the response selector in one case is assisted by another person there who's attending to the same thing you are, and in the other case, it's distracted by a person on the other end of the phone who doesn't know what's going on where you are. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, I'm gonna keep it. It's been. Oh yeah, we're good. We're really good on time. We're beautiful on time. Okay. We're perfect. Okay. So your mental toolbox, your gas tank in your brain, the amount of stuff that you can use to control where you deploy your attention is called your executive control. Okay, your executive control is this mechanism that you have for being able to say, okay, I want to walk from point A to point B and not from point A to point D or point A to point Z or trip and fall on the ground, right? I want to do this and not those other things, all right? That's executive control that allows you to do that. And so Different theorists have slightly different ideas of what's going on with executive control, but here's kind of one reasonable theory that is accepted by a lot of people, okay? So you could say that your day-to-day behavior, what you do normally, is guided by habit, okay? So your habits tell you the kinds of things you're used to and the kinds of things you're not used to. In some cases, you might want to do something differently from your habit. And your executive control is going to allow you to remember what your goal is. So let's say your goal is to get to school every day, and every day you drive the same way to school, but one day there's an accident on your way to school. Your executive control is going to say, oh, well, my goal is to get to school, so I'm going to take a different route. I'm going to route myself another way to get to school. And so that then will inhibit the automatic response. Duh, right? Your habits, okay? So you're not going to just drive right through the accident. Though sometimes, if you're really not paying attention, you know, have you ever had that thing where you're going home and you know that the exit you usually take is blocked? And so you say that you just say in your brain, you know, I'm going to go past it, and then you get off at your exit anyways. You get off at the exit you're used to getting off at anyways, and you're like, oh, you know, I didn't go to the one that I was supposed to go to. Have you had that happen? Where you driving on automatic? Okay, you know what I'm talking about. All right. And so if we're able to focus our attention, that's a lack of attention, right? When we do that. If we're able to focus our attention and keep our goal in mind, that's our executive control, overcoming the habit. When you remember to take a different route, okay? That's your executive control that allows you to do that. And we know that it's the frontal lobes that do a lot of this executive control, because people who have frontal lobe damage have a very hard time with this. They'll just fall back on habit. They do what are called preservation errors, okay? So they'll say, you know, like I'll say, okay, what I want you to do is pick out the green M&Ms, okay? And you give them a bowl of M&Ms. So they start picking out the green M&Ms. And you say to them, okay, I want you to stop and now pick out the red M&Ms, okay? They have a really hard time doing that. And they'll often go back and do the task that you first asked them to do and start picking out green M&Ms, all right? Because they don't have really good executive control because their frontal lobes are damaged. And another thing that they'll do is called goal neglect, where they just have a hard time keeping a goal in mind and therefore organizing their behaviors at all, okay? So like you might give them a picture and you say, you study this picture for 5 minutes and then I want you to draw it, okay? They might start drawing and then get distracted by something else and start, you know, putting in completely different things. They don't have a good ability to say, okay, well, I'm going to pay attention to this and then draw this, and then I'm going to pay attention to this and then draw this. They get everything all mixed up. They have problems with their planning. Yes?
Is that kind of what happens with people with attention deficit disorders?
Attention deficit disorder is complicated. Okay, so but if I had to put it into these words, it's kind of, their problem is with the filter. The problem for most people with ADHD is, well, it's complicated, like I say, but one of the aspects is that other things that for most people get filtered out, they attend to that instead of the thing that most people would have go through the filter. They have a lot of stuff getting clogged in the filter. Okay, cool. Okay, so attention has a lot of different working parts. We know that we have attentional filters. We also know that we can use our goals and our top-down processing in order to promote attention to the objects we do want to pay attention to. We know that you can pay attention spatially or to a particular object. We can say, you know, pay attention to the left side of the screen, or we can say pay attention anytime a square comes on the screen, okay? Two different things, one's spatial, one's object-based. You also have your habit behaviors versus your goal-directed behaviors, and the difference there is how much executive control are you using. So what does practice do to our attentional abilities? When you practice something over and over and over and over again, what effect does that have on attention? And it has a pretty amazing effect on attention. When you practice something again and again and again, you don't have to pay attention to it anymore. And so you can put your attention to another task. And that's why things like becoming a star athlete, you know, becoming, who did I have, Serena Williams in the last picture? Probably, I friggin' love Serena Williams. Okay, Serena Williams, right? How did these people become so amazing? Well, when you first learn tennis, you learn the basics of tennis. And you have to pay attention to the basics. You have to pay attention to your swing. You have to pay attention to the ball. You have to pay attention to all these different things and start to put it together. But after you get used to doing that, now you can attend to higher order stuff. Like your coach says, okay, you're doing great with always making contact with the ball, but now I want you to change how the strength of your hitting so that you can hit the ball into different places. And then after you already know how to change your strength automatically, okay, well now you can pay attention to reading your opponent. And then when reading your opponent becomes automatic, now you can go to, you know, like looking at the weather and seeing how that's going to affect your game. Okay, the more you practice and the more things become automatic, the higher level things you can be paying attention to. And other things you can be paying attention to. Yeah.
Like, I was trying to learn guitar, and the teacher kept saying like, "Oh, you know, your fingers get used to it because at first you tell your fingers to do some things, but you know, it just takes practice because then they just do it on their own."
Yes, that's exactly right. That's called automaticity. Okay. So the reason that habits are habits is because you have practiced them often. Okay. Before that thing becomes a habit, before you practiced it again and again and again, you have to pay attention a lot. And, you know, imagine something as complicated as tennis or ice skating or any of these, you know, professional sports. It's incredibly complicated, all the different things you have to do. First, you have to attend to the ball. Then you have to attend to the racket. Then you have to attend to where your feet are. Then you have to attend to how you're bent. Then you have to attend to how far back you bring your hand. You have to attend to all these different things. But that's why the coaches want you to practice this thing again. Today we're going to practice what's it called? Foul shots, right? Or layups, right? Okay? Today we're going to practice layups. Layups, 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 layups. Today we're going to practice foul shots, foul shots, foul shots, foul shots. We're trying to get you to become automatic with those things. And when you put them together, the more and more you do it, the more and more you put the entire process together. To where, for an ice skater, okay, when they're doing a routine, they have sequences of that routine. Okay, the first part that's building up to the first set of jumps, then the second part that's building up to the second set of jumps, and so on and so forth, okay? Until you can have this one giant sequence of events. Think about when you were first learning to write. At first, you know, my 5-year-old is really early on in the writing process. And so, you know, first she has to learn how to make the A for her name, right? Okay? And some of her early writing where she's trying to make her name Avalon, you know, it's right? And then she just lost interest. Okay, that was the end of that. But now that she's been practicing writing her name, it's automatic. She's got the thing. She can do it. Okay? And that has now become a sequence of events. And you guys do it automatically. You just write it at the top of your page. It's nothing. You don't have to attend to it anymore. And the more and more you write, the more and more it becomes like that. And believe it or not, that's what I'm doing in this class. That's what everything that's happening to you at university, the reason you have to study so much is you're practicing using your brain. You're practicing this information over and over and over again, so one day you can get up, put it all together into one beautiful performance and maybe do something like this, like what I'm doing, or be a data, wizard, or be, a research wizard, or whatever it is that you do. It's about practicing and practicing and practicing those tasks. And the more time you dedicate to doing that, the better you're going to be at your job that you eventually have. The better you're going to be at the thing that you eventually want to do. When my kids were little, I made them all get into some kind of activity that they would do for 10 years. Because 10 years is how long it takes to become an expert at an activity, more or less. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, is that like muscle memory?
So muscle memory is a funny thing because muscles don't have memories.
Well, I mean the same muscle memory.
Right. Yeah, it's a funny saying because muscles don't have memories. The thing that has memory is your brain.
Yeah.
So what you're altering are the connections in your brain. And that is more important than having a buffed out body. Okay? That is what the key of it is. All right. Still, everyone knows, even Serena Williams can make a mistake, right? She's goes through that terrible pregnancy where she gets all, messed up, and then a really traumatic labor and delivery, and then she got really, really sick. And so, oh my gosh, she came in second place once. Isn't it terrible, right? Okay, right? Because she was dedicating her energy at the time to so many other things. She's got a child, she's got to take care of her health, she has to direct her attention to other things, right? But still, because she spent so long practicing and become so amazing at this and has this in her head, she's still, dominant champion that she is. Okay. So once practice has made it that you have a behavior where you're an expert, okay? So everybody in this class right now is an expert at reading and writing. You all can read and write at an expert level because you've been doing it for longer than 10 years. But what I can do, and so you guys, after you practice writing, you can dedicate yourself to the higher order and higher order aspects of what it is you're doing. So when you're, when this school gives you 10 pages to write for every class, it's not to torture you. It's because the more you do it, the better you get at it. Just plain and simple. And we want you to be good communicators. Because being a good communicator is probably the most important thing you can be with whatever job that it is you do after this. Being able to communicate whatever it is you're doing is critical. So we have you practice it again and again and again and again. And there's scaffolding for each of these classes where you practice things once and then you practice it at a higher level and a higher level. We're trying to make it so that you can get to those next higher levels, where writing a paper like you would write for this class is nothing. It's nothing. It's something you can do with automaticity. Because we want you to be able to write the next level paper, which is a scientific paper, and so on and so forth. Okay? But sometimes that automaticity comes at a cost because it's hard to control an automatic behavior, all right? And reading for everybody is an automatic behavior, everybody in this class at this point. And so you don't have to really pay attention to anything to be able to read the words. If I say just look over here and read the words, you have no problem going red, blue, green, red, yellow, blue, okay? It's just, you look at it, you automatically read it, right? Because you've done reading so many times, if a word is there, how can you not read it? But in the Stroop effect, when I say to you, okay, now I don't want you to tell me what the word says, I want you to tell me the color of the word, okay? It's no problem on this side because they match, right? Red, blue, green, red, yellow, blue. But on this side, if I say tell the color, people are much slower to do that. Yellow, red, blue, red, yellow, green. Okay, you get my point. Okay, people make more errors and are slower because the reading is automatic. And that's the Stroop effect, where you have one task that's automatic to everybody who's a participant, and it's interfering with their ability to do a different task. Okay, so why is this stuff important to you? I want you guys to know the limits of your attentional abilities so that you can better direct it. If you know, okay, so now we talked about multitasking. So you know that if you go home now and you put on music that doesn't have words, you're going to have a much easier time with a writing assignment than if you put on music that does have words, because those are two language-based activities. And you also know that practicing again and again and again, that's what studying is, gets you better and better and better at these activities. Your ability to exercise executive control is because of your practice. The idea of natural abilities, natural talents, is a total myth. Cognitive science has shown very conclusively that there is no such thing as natural talent. Everything is about practice. The exceptions to this rule that they found where having some kind of natural state helps you is short people are better at gymnastics and tall people are better at basketball. But that's just about being able to interact with the equipment. Other than that, there's just about nothing that's natural. So that idea that, oh, they're a natural at music or they're a natural at this, cognitive science says that that's not true at all. It's all about what you attend to and what you practice. That's why your insurance rates go down the older you get. Because the more you practice executive control, the more you inhibit yourself from doing stupid stuff while you're driving, okay? The more practice you have, and the better you get at it, and the safer you are. If you're a reckless driver, and I'm not mentioning any names, you know who you are. My brother. Shoot, I named somebody. Okay. Your reckless habits become ingrained, become practiced, okay? So if you want to be able to follow your goals, practice them. If you want to be good at your job someday, be good at what you're doing right now. If you want to be incompetent at your job someday, be incompetent at what you're doing right now. Because you're practicing for it, right? All right? So if you make executive control your habit, then the next level and the next level and the next level gets easier. Questions? See you next week.